Introducing the Sundor region, a Pokemon Fakemon region based in Australia. Now this region is created by Sundor Fakemon and I've linked their Instagram in the description. Now let's get into the complete Pokedex. Rugby, grass type. Rugby are known as some of the most determined and loyal Pokemon in Sundor. In the wild, they are often found training to improve their skills, inspired by rugby players and kangaroos. Kangravine, grass and fighting type. This Pokemon is known for creating a game played all over Sundor. Anyone can play it, but these Pokemon are the best. Trunk Scrum, grass and fighting type. Trunk Scrum trained their entire lives to become ultimate athletes. They practice by pummeling trees into rugby balls. Embala, fire type. Embala is an incredibly happy yet lazy Pokemon. They eat all sorts of food throughout their day so they can improve their defenses. Inspired by koalas and overeating. Koaboom, fire and poison type. Due to the large amount of poisonous eucalyptus this Pokemon eats, it creates an explosive reaction in its stomach, also inspired by eucalyptus. Explosion, fire and poison type. This gentle giant can become quite ferocious if its food or friends are harmed. The food it eats causes an explosive reaction, also inspired by explosions. Dolphin, water type. Dolphins spend most of their time looking at their reflections in the water. They are very proud Pokemon that sometimes have a hard time listening to their trainer. Inspired by dolphins, coral, and royalty. Paw Prints, water and rock type. This Pokemon can be likened to a spoiled teenager. They are awkward Pokemon who get angry if they don't get what they want. Also inspired by the Great Barrier Reef. Coroil, water and rock type. This Pokemon is known as the ruler of the sea. They're very haughty and will only listen to trainers they have a strong bond with. Brawlworm, bug type. Brawlworm have an affinity for causing big fights, often getting into trouble with Pokemon much bigger than them. Inspired by the Hercules moth caterpillar. Scrapon, bug type. When a Brawlworm evolves, it goes into its cocoon so it may meditate and increase its defenses. Inspired by the Hercules moth caterpillar, cocoons, and fighting. Stolmoth, bug and fighting type. When Stolmoth emerge from their cocoon, they are extremely aggressive until they are able to win 100 battles in a row. Inspired by the Hercules moth and fighting. Kuklat, normal and flying type. Due to the wide range of food that Kuklat eat, there are 4 distinct subspecies that can be found in Sundor. Bitter, spicy, refreshed, and zesty diet type. Inspired by kookaburras, their colours, and their diets. Pompabear, normal and flying type. When a Kuklat evolves into a Pompabear, it feels entitled to hoard as much food as it can for its evolution. Gurabara, normal and flying type. Gurabara are known as some of the most ferocious Pokemon in Sundor, doing whatever it takes to fill their bellies. Rombat, normal type. Rombat are extremely playful Pokemon that are found all over Sundor. They are oftentimes kept as pets, inspired by wombats. Rockaroll, normal and rock type. Rockaroll are extremely loud Pokemon, but are very musically talented. They can be heard for miles around. Inspired by wombats, AC/DC, and rock and roll. Shuglary, fairy and flying type. Shuglary live in the woods and trees surrounding towns. They often help passing trainers in return for sweets, based on sugar gliders and the sweet and sour motif. Impungent, fairy and flying type. Impungent are huge tricksters that will wait for unsuspecting travelers so that they can steal their berries and food. Also inspired by pixies. Sundorian Rattata, ground and normal type. After being introduced to the Sundor region, this Pokemon changed due to the lack of water and the arid environment. Inspired by mice, dehydration, and starvation. Sundorian Raticate, ground and normal type. Raticate become increasingly hostile the longer they go without water. Inspired by kangaroo rats, dehydration, and the desert. Kindlet, fire type. Kindlet are often found isolated from other Pokemon. They spend their time in solitude hunting Rattata in the desert. Inspired by baby snakes and pythons in the desert. Python, fire type. Python are one of the top predators in the desert. It takes a well-trained Pokemon to defeat one. Enkipaku, electric type. Enkipaku are sweet Pokemon that often live by themselves. They use their spines as defense mechanisms against other Pokemon. Inspired by echidnas and Pika clones. Ferritin, dark type. Ferritin live in the streets of Sundor's big cities. They live in packs to cause trouble and take care of each other. Inspired by feral cats. Ferrolinx, dark and steel type. Ferrolinx prowl at night to find unsuspecting prey. They are known by many to be ruthless Pokemon. Inspired by feral cats, lynx, and knife crime. Pigmodo, poison and dragon type. Pigmodo use their long tongues as whips to spread a poison. This poison is highly toxic and tricky to cure. Inspired by pygmy goannas and Australian stock whips. Garguana, poison and dragon type. Garguana spend most of their time boasting their power. They are some of the most powerful Pokemon in the desert. Inspired by gargantuan goannas and Australian stock whips. Wactus, grass and fighting type. Wactus are extremely simple Pokemon. They are trained by older Seguase in martial arts schools across the desert, inspired by karate and a cactus. Seguase, grass and fighting type. This Pokemon is extremely dedicated to its fighting style. Despite its harsh appearance, it loves teaching others its moves. Puglix, water and poison type. Puglix are sickly Pokemon that originated on Palacana Island. They have since become an invasive species in Sundor, inspired by diseased platypus in Tasmania. Pestapux, water and poison type. Pestapux are very loving Pokemon. Despite being very sickly, they use their power to heal any Pokemon that they can. Spydree, bug type. This Pokemon is quite popular among bug collectors in Sundor, inspired by redback spiders and webs. Tarantula, bug and flying type. Tarantula are avid flyers. They use the webbing on their backs and the wind to fly all over Sundor, inspired by spiders using their webs to float in the air. Tarantula evolves from Spydree during the day. Spydreary, bug and dark type. Spydreary are extremely malicious Pokemon. They only come out at night to prey on unsuspecting Pokemon, inspired by redback spiders. Spydreary evolves from Spydree during the night. Sundorian Ekans, ice type. Due to the large competition with other snake-like Pokemon in Sundor, Ekans were forced to move to the snowy mountains, inspired by snakes and the cold. Sundorian Arbok, ice type. Arbok and Sundor are in a sleep-like state for most of their lives. If any creature meets Arbok's gaze, they are frozen immediately. Venopan, poison and ground type. Venopan are known to live on their own in the deserts of Sundor. Unless they're provoked, they do not meddle with others. Inspired by taipans in the desert. Carakelp, water and grass type. This Pokemon lives primarily in the oceans surrounding Sundor. They search the sand to find vegetation for their shells. Inspired by crabs and the Great Barrier Reef. Scrabblus, water and grass type. Scrabblus love to sleep under the sand in the ocean. Small fish Pokemon like to make Scrabblus's back their home. Crustacean, water and grass type. Crustacean becomes living ecosystems for Pokemon on the ocean floor. They very rarely leave the water. Sundorian Tangler, poison type. This Pokemon is found washed up on the shores of Sundor. It likes to poison any beachgoers that happen to walk near it. Inspired by Doflenia armata. Tangrel, poison type. Tangrel are extremely mischievous Pokemon that often harass people and other Pokemon alike. Budao, ghost type. Budao are the souls of past people. Even if they fly far away, they always return to their former body's resting place. Inspired by boomerangs and spirits. Reverang, ghost and steel type. This Pokemon roams the land to find a worthy trainer or other Pokemon to call its combatant. Sundorian Woobat, grass and flying type. Woobat are extremely sweet Pokemon, both figuratively and literally. They live in the woods and forests of Sundor, inspired by a literal fruit bat. Sundorian Swoobat, grass and flying type. Swoobat like to live at the tops of trees during the day. At night, they swarm the skies looking for berries to nibble on. Peblup, normal type. This Pokemon loves to dig around in the desert. It will often find items and bring them to people and Pokemon alike, inspired by a dingo. Excavation, ground and normal type. This Pokemon has taken its passion for digging to the next level. It's very loyal and often helps out at excavation sites, inspired by dingo and excavators. Terravager, ground and normal type. This Pokemon is one of the fastest in Sundor. It uses its extreme speed to excavate entire sites on its own. Sundorian Lickitung, fighting type. No one is sure how Lickitung were introduced to Sundor. Soon after, they began aggressively competing for resources. Inspired by smooth newts, which pose a threat to Australian environments. Sundorian Licky, fighting type. When it adapted to the climate, Licky became an invasive species in Sundor. It threatens people and Pokemon alike. Inspired by brawlers and smooth newts. Shock'em, electric type. Shock'em are very simple Pokemon that love to roam the expansive wild areas of Sundor, inspired by camels and dry lightning. Dromerator, electric type. Dromerator are very powerful Pokemon, both on and off the field. They are used to power entire camps in the wild area, also inspired by generators. Sigmes, dark and flying type. Sigmes was once an extremely beautiful Pokemon, but some ecological disaster made it look this way, inspired by Signets and oil spills. Swagooze, dark and flying type. This Pokemon viciously attacks anyone who makes fun of their appearance. They are jealous of all Pokemon that are beautiful, inspired by black swans and oil spills. Vampire, rock and dark type. This ancient Pokemon loved to live in caves all over the region. They were protective of them when people passed through. Inspired by Brachypasidoros, vampires and stalagmites, revived from the wing fossil. Stalagul, rock and dark type. These Pokemon hang from the tops of caves, pretending to be stalactites. They pounce on prey as they pass under them. Nibleaf, rock and grass type. This Pokemon lives in lush forests and fields. They were extremely peaceful Pokemon that love to nibble all vegetation. Inspired by Atlas Coppercasaurus and herbivores. Revived from the tail fossil. Chlorosaurus, rock and grass type. Chlorosaurus are known for their impressive speed on foot. When they're not eating, they often race for fun. Inspired by Atlas Coppercosaurus, Matsubarasaurus, herbivores, and vines. Cassowary, normal type. This interesting Pokemon is the topic of research studies all over Sundor. Its change of attitude has never been seen before. Inspired by cassowaries and the fight or flight response. Thragon, dragon and ground type. This Pokemon loves to lounge around in the desert. If a predator comes along, it either hides or runs away. Inspired by thorny devils and a Lil. Treemu, grass type. This Pokemon is the most common prey of the Imbala line. The leaves on the Pokemon's body are poisonous when eaten. Inspired by emus and eucalyptus trees. Folit, fire type. These sickly Pokemon were meant to be working Pokemon like Mudbray and Mudsdale. They're too weak to do any jobs. Inspired by feral donkeys in the desert. Boroferno, fire and ground type. This Pokemon has become a pest and a nuisance to the region. Their mean nature scares almost every trainer away. Sundorian Chatot, poison and flying type. These Pokemon have changed with the rise of urban development in the region. They've resorted to eating trash for food. Inspired by trash parrots, also known as the cockatoo. Lizuna, fighting and steel type. This Pokemon is well known for two things, its own unique fighting style and its deep-rooted rivalry with all Gramble. Inspired by the legend of the lizard man Birion, who was the first to learn the fighting style Corrida. Sundorian Snubbull, fairy type. This Pokemon is on the losing side of a deep-seated rivalry with Lizuna. Its body is covered in bruises from constant attacks. Inspired by spiky-eared dogs, brawlers, and dogs that get ill eating lizards. Sundorian Gramble, fighting type. The deep bruises on this Pokemon have become sturdy muscles. This Pokemon is now quite strong and defensive. Torpup, water and steel type. This Pokemon is one of the fastest and most menacing predators in Sundor's waters. Inspired by torpedoes and baby sharks. Celecrine, water and steel type. Celecrine are used for transportation services all over Sundor. They can travel through strong currents with ease. Inspired by sharks and submarines. Submeladon, water and steel type. This massive Pokemon is too big and menacing to be used for transportation. Only very skilled trainers can tame Submeladon. Snuppy, ice type. Snuppy absolutely love to play with children outside in the snow. They are one of the most popular pets in Sundor. Inspired by Huskies, St. Bernards and Avalanche Rescues. Blizkey, ice type. Blizkey are extremely helpful Pokemon that are often found in the mountains. They help find people who get lost in the snow. Evolves from Snuppy with high friendship. Mongrice, ice and dark type. Snuppy evolve into Mongrice when they've been abandoned or mistreated by their trainer. Their anger knows no bounds. Inspired by Huskies, Wolves and abandoned dogs. Evolves from Snuppy with zero friendship. Sundorian Shieldon, dragon and steel type. There were so many revived Shieldon in Sundor that they were reintroduced to the wild. They reverted to their original type. Inspired by Shields and Protoceratops. Sundorian Bastiodon, dragon and steel type. This hulking Pokemon lives in the woodlands of Sundor. They are usually harmless unless provoked. Inspired by the Australian Minmi and Ceratopsian dinosaurs. Rumbleroo, dark and ground type. Rumbleroo are quite rowdy Pokemon that love to put on a show for others. Inspired by Wallaroos, masked wrestlers and boxers. Marsuplex, dark and ground type. This Pokemon craves attention, so they resort to fighting dirty and putting on elaborate shows. Digid, rock and ground type. This Pokemon is most often found looking for ores in the mines near Port Muddia. Inspired by golems, miners and the Australian gold rush. Magold, rock and steel type. This Pokemon has made a fortune mining for gold, but it doesn't share the wealth with anyone, even its own family. Inspired by golems, gold miners, rich people and greedy people. Toxifry, poison type. Toxifry live in large groups under the sea. They rarely come above the waves due to their timid natures. Inspired by blue-lined octopus and their poison that can paralyze people. Electring, poison and electric type. This Pokemon has become very angsty upon evolution. They become annoyed very easily and shock people often. Coruscapod, poison and electric type. Coruscapod are known to have such strong poison that it paralyzes its opponents with just one drop. Rotom Drill, electric and ground type. Rotom assumes this form when it takes over a drill powered by a special motor. It battles with seismic vibrations, inspired by electric energy and poltergeists. Rotom Wi-Fi, electric and psychic type. Rotom assumes this form when it takes over a modem powered by a special motor. It fights with strong Wi-Fi rays. Sundorian Helioptile, fire and normal type. In Sundor, Helioptile lose their frills due to the sheer amount of sun in the deserts. It now absorbs it through their whole body. Inspired by lizards in the desert and the spotted salamander. Sundorian Heliolisk, fire and normal type. Heliolisk have a burning passion for energy, so much so that they spend all of their time absorbing the sun's rays. Sundorian Meowth, psychic type. This Pokemon uses its psychic powers to float its precious coin above its head. It's bad luck if the coin ever touches the ground. Inspired by cats, telepathy, and fortune tellers. Persona, Psychic type. These friendly Pokemon love to travel Sundor and give psychic readings to people and Pokemon. Spiritina, Ghost type. This Pokemon is thought to be the lost souls of opera singers. They are usually found singing solemn songs. Inspired by ghosts, opera singers, composers, and the Phantom of the Opera. Spectezo, Ghost and Fairy type. This Pokemon's love for the opera has become an obsession. It likes to control and direct other Pokemon. Fantistro, Ghost and Fairy type. Fantistro are extremely powerful Pokemon that love to put on entire operas by themselves. Sundorian Mantike, Electric and Water type. This Pokemon is a nuisance to the fishermen in Sundor. If they get caught in the nets, the fishermen will get electrocuted. Inspired by stingrays and thunderstorms. Sundorian Mantine, Electric and Water type. This Pokemon is seen as a bad omen by sailors leaving ports. Sundorian Doduo, Psychic and Flying type. Due to the harsh environment, Doduos had to resort to sharpening their twin minds in order to survive. Inspired by flamingos and telepathy. Sundorian Dodrio, Psychic and Flying type. Dodrio's immense psychic power is concentrated in the gems on their heads, which are similar to those of gold ducks. Sundorian Onyx, Rock and Dark type. Due to the different rocks it digests now, this Onyx is now faster and more defensive. Inspired by the Kalkajaka Black Mountain. Sundorian Steelix, Steel and Dark type. Due to the strange black rocks it eats, Steelix is a lot less sturdy than its Johto counterpart, however, it's more aggressive. Jellicool, Water and Ice type. This Pokemon is found deep in the sea where its cold and cruel nature pairs well with the freezing waters. Inspired by Crown Jellyfish and Royalty. Tundreagle, Water and Ice type. This Pokemon has an air of arrogance about it. It regularly gets into feuds with Paw Prints over their nobility. Sundorian Stantler, Ice and Rock type. This Pokemon traverses the craggy cliffs of the snowy mountains in Sundor. They are very territorial. Inspired by reindeer that live on snowy mountains. Hopple, Normal type. This Pokemon is found in great abundance all over Sundor. Some consider it to be a nuisance. Inspired by invasive rabbit overpopulation in Australia. Rabroot, Normal and Fighting type. This hulking beast is quite dangerous. This Pokemon is the result of a large group of frenzied Hopple. Devial, Dark type. This mischievous Pokemon loves to trick people and steal from their camps in the wild area. Inspired by Tasmanian devils and bush rangers / bandits. Devorado, Dark type. Devorado are famous for being thieves. They are often caught by criminals to assist with heists. Also inspired by prisoners. Sundorian Purloin, Ghost type. This ghoulish Pokemon haunts the graveyards of Sundor. They love to spook people at night. Inspired by phantom cats, which are a myth in Australia. Sundorian Lipard, Ghost type. Lipard in the Sundor region have become vengeful spirits who take revenge on people who mistreat their Pokemon. Kudzug, Grass type. This interesting Pokemon is one of the rarest species in Sundor. It is only found along one route, although no one knows why. Inspired by Kudzu and Slugs. Invadush, Grass and Psychic type. This Pokemon has become incredibly territorial of its home. Inspired by Kudzu, Slugs, and aliens in the Bass Strait Triangle. Forestreal, Grass and Psychic type. This Pokemon has decided to invade other territories. It is theorized that this Pokemon originated from space. Also inspired by flying saucers. Glixie, Bug and Fairy type. This Pokemon is loved in all of Sundor. They are a common Pokemon to gift to small children as pets. Inspired by fireflies and guiding lights. Leadlight, Bug and Fairy type. These peaceful Pokemon guide lost people and Pokemon back to their homes during the night. Inspired by fairies, fireflies, Min lights, and guiding lights. Sundorian Squovit, Ice type. Due to living in the cold and icy mountain climate, Squovit work hard to hoard any sort of heat that they can. Inspired by Arctic ground squirrels. Wardent, Ice and Fire type. This Pokemon works with Blizzkey and the Pokemon Explorers to find people lost on the slopes of Sundor's icy mountains. Inspired by the Arctic ground squirrel, Arctic rescue, and internal heat. Vegetot, Grass type. This mischievous Pokemon loves to create problems for people and Pokemon alike. It drives people away with its strong smell. Inspired by Vegemite and Bad Kids. Vegemite, Grass and Dark type. Vegemite are extremely vengeful Pokemon. They take out their anger on everyone who calls them disgusting. Inspired by Vegemite, Sludge monsters, and Revenge. Sundorian Bidgew, Poison type. Sundor's harsh environment has caused Bidgew to become more toxic. It is sad because it thinks trainers are ignoring it. Inspired by Oleander and Buds. Sundorian Roselia, Poison and Fairy type. This Pokemon has come to terms with its loneliness, embracing its toxic power. Trainers must prove themselves to befriend it. Also inspired by bushes. Olead, Poison and Fairy type. Olead are incredibly faithful Pokemon. They use their poisonous bouquets to protect their trainers in any way they can. Also inspired by brides. Hatchling, Water type. Hatchling use their tail to shoot water at foes and to swim faster underwater. Inspired by baby crocodiles and water guns. Dracodile, Water and Dragon type. These Pokemon store water inside their bodies to help put out the wildfires that may occur in the wild area. Inspired by crocodiles, water hoses, and a little bit of Godzilla. Crocqua, water and dragon type. This massive Pokemon's cannon is so powerful that it can cut through anything in its path, including steel. Inspired by crocodiles, water cannons, and a little bit of Godzilla and Spinosaurus. Riblaze, fire type. This Pokemon is not very popular due to its fondness for causing trouble. They enjoy tricking others and running away. Inspired by Beelzebufos and the Yaramayahu. Brimtoad, fire and rock type. These Pokemon have become particularly malicious towards Pokemon. Their tricks usually end up hurting others. Beelzebold, fire and rock type. Beelzebold is seen as a monster to most people. It is rumored that it eats entire Pokemon whole. Also inspired by Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies. Regiseer, psychic type. There are theories that before a human or Pokemon is born, Regiseer has carefully crafted its soul and determined its life story. The inspiration for this is that, since the Regis represent an age for humans, Sundor's Regis represent a spiritual age for humans. In this case, the time before a person is born and their soul is formed. Regighoul, ghost type. It is believed that after a person passes, Regighoul takes their soul to the afterlife. Sometimes lost souls become Pokemon. Inspired by the time after a person passed away and their soul is taken to the afterlife. Thylantasm, normal and ghost type. This vengeful Pokemon was the last of its kind. It now protects Pokemon that have been mistreated by humans. Inspired by the Thylacine being in captivity and going extinct. Ugardon, grass and rock type. This isolated Pokemon is the protector of Sundor's nature. It wants to preserve all life, but especially its home, Boogie Forest. Inspired by the Yowie and rock statues / art. Rainbower, fairy and water type. This Pokemon is said to have used its legendary power to create the Sundor region and give life to its inhabitants. Inspired by the Rainbow Serpent. If you enjoyed this full Pokedex video, you might like the full Pokedex video on the Minecraft region, or check out the Fakemon playlist with over 20 different Fakemon regions.